Hello, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and joining me today is my friend David Rabinovitch. How are you today, David?
Hi, Eric. It's really great to see you again on Zoom and talk about my book and all the other terrific books that have been nominated for the Crime Writers of Canada Awards.
Yes, I'm always very, very happy when one of my interviews that I had earlier on in last year or this year gets nominated for one of these awards. So you're one of three, so congratulations, and I'm very, very happy for you.
Well, it's the first step, I guess, to be interviewed by you.
I wish that was true. So, David, you've been nominated for a Brass Knuckles Award for Best Nonfiction Crime Book, sponsored by David Reed Simpson Law Firm in Hamilton. Um, we'll talk a little bit about the book, obviously, but I'm very curious to see what you've been up to. So, for anyone listening who doesn't know who you are, let's do very difficult to edit your bio and keep it short, but I'm going to try my best. So, David is an Emmy, Peabody, and Gemini Award-winning filmmaker with a background in investigative journalism. He has testified before Congress, documented human rights abuses in China, exposed exploitation victims of mass disaster, and contributed to Frontline, Dateline, and Investigative Reports. He has written for the Toronto Globe and Mail, the San Francisco Chronicle, Time Magazine, and the U.S. News and World Report. He was raised in the prairie town of Morden, Manitoba, where his uncle Wolfe Rabin exploits remain a subject of myth and lore. He divides his time between the Pacific Northwest and Baja, California.
From where I speak to you today.
So as I mentioned before, he and I chatted. He was actually the fifth guest I had on the Crime Writers of Canada podcast back in October of 2023, around when your book came out, I think. I
Yes.
think I was lucky enough to be one of the first people you interviewed, or interviewed you rather. So let's talk a little bit about the book. It's called Jukebox Empire. I was curious if my kids knew what a jukebox was, and they thought it played CDs. So they were a little bit right, let's say. But when your story takes place in the 1950s, it was huge. It was, like you said, it was an empire. It's hard for me, even at my age, to imagine it being an empire. So can you talk a little bit about both the device and the empire?
Sure. The jukeboxes really came into prominence beginning in the mid 1930s when prohibition in the U.S. was over. Thousands of bars opened, and they needed music. It was too expensive to hire musicians everywhere, and the jukebox was the solution. But the early jukeboxes, first they could only play one disc, and then they could play 10. But so by 1937, I think it was, there were over 400,000 jukeboxes being produced in the United States. Huge. Then all jukebox production stopped during World War II and resumed at the end of the war. The factories had been repurposed during the war. For instance, Rockola, which was another Canadian, David Rockola from Morden, Manitoba, he made M1 rifles for the US Army and made millions of dollars. But really where my book begins in the jukebox aspect of it is right after the war. Every jukebox really around the world needs to be replaced because the technology was funky and clunky and everything broke down and needed constant repairs. And where my uncle, Bill or Wolfe Rabin, came into it was with a plan to build a machine that could play 30 discs. Now, we got these little things in our ears and we can play one of 5 million songs. There's nothing to it. It was a huge breakthrough. It revolutionized the coin machine industry. And to the extent that to promote it, he bought a surplus plane from the US Army and barnstormed the country with his jukebox. So, and they were really big. The technology improved. Then they could play by the early 1950s. They could play 100 discs. Then another, archaic technology came along, archaic to us, 45 RPM records, which had a little hole in the middle. and they could put a lot more of them in there. And then ultimately, as one of your kids remembered, by the 1980s, I think 80s into the 90s, there were jukeboxes that could play CDs. So the sound quality got better and they could load 100 or 200 of them. And there are still jukeboxes today. You put $1 in and you can choose almost any song that exists because they stream. They come from somewhere up in the satellite. So the technology is still around.
You know, as you were speaking, I was just thinking about it. That probably would have been the first time in human history that you could hear a song kind of like anywhere, like not being reliant to just the radio, I guess. Or I guess
Well,
people had record players, but to actually hear it like in a, like how else would you hear music in a, no, I guess, sorry, this is a dumb question.
no,
Because I
it's
guess
not.
if you went,
Eric, it's a terrific question because there's a whole sociological change in the way we listen to music. And so the very first jukeboxes, which the term didn't even come into use until the late 1930s, was called an audiophone or coin-operated phonograph. They didn't have speakers. It's the 1890s, but they had like 4 telephone receivers. And so 4 people could stand around and hold the little thing and play it. So they improved, they got better, but music was still a social experience.
mm,
You had this, I think what you're getting at. You either had to sit around the phonograph or then, it's the mid 1920s, it's like 100 years ago, the radio begins. Really,
mm,
it's hard to believe, how far back it is and then how close it is in a way. And so the phenomenon of radio was still something where people gathered around the radio to listen. So you gathered around the phonograph, you gathered around the radio, or you went to the bar or the diner or the dance club, and people gathered around the jukebox. And certainly I, as a teenager growing up, you go to a diner and they had the selectors at every booth, and you put your quarter in and pick 5 songs, and it played centrally, but the whole place heard it. So the big change begins in the late 1970s with the introduction of the cassette player known as the Sony Walkman, which was music within a respected personal space in a crowded environment. And so they did the Walkman, the Discman, and now we have the iPods and everything. Now it's just all on our phones. But so we've become, I think, much more isolated in that sense, that everybody can play whatever they want and ignore everybody else around them. Where before that, music was a social experience, and the jukebox was a big part of it.
yeah, for me, I remember it just because of Happy Days. That's what the first picture that
Sure.
comes to my mind is Fonzie by the jukebox. And uh, I can imagine how culturally important it was at that time. And it's
Well,
hard to imagine
well,
now.
it was also criminally important. So let me just pick up. Maybe I'm preempting your next question, but it was not only culturally significant, but in fact, because the coins were collected by distributors who ultimately almost all came to be owned by racketeering organizations. And they were, big, heavy bags of coins, but income that did not need to be reported, or they didn't think it needed to be reported to the IRS or Revenue Canada or whatever country you were in, which ultimately led to what's in my book really the first indication of the vertical integration of organized crime, where they could go from being the thugs who worked for the racketeers collecting the coins, then they began to own the distribution companies. And what the story in my book is that they then could own the means of production. They could build the jukeboxes, own them, collect the money, distribute them, vertical integration of organized crime in legitimate business.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was fascinating when we first talked about it. I guess this is kind of good news because I Googled you right before our interview today, and I just went to the videos, and I could see you've been busy. You've been a very successful film producer for many years, and you've told me that you've done screenings around the world. Is doing a book different, or is it marketing?
Well, it's similar, but what I've personally learned through this is the impact of social media, of reaching out on the net and digitally, and that tends to come back. I suppose, a film or a television program is the result of a whole group effort. A book is, it's from here to the keyboard to the screen, and we all hope, to a publisher and into bookstores. So I guess I've found that the personal attention and interest is a lot more, even though, I've been very grateful to have the recognition of some of my films and as a director. But there just seems to me to be, by an order of magnitude, a lot more personal attention as an author. Now, I've always been a writer, but I've learned the distinction is if it's in a book that you can hold up, then you're an author. You get the difference. A writer can write a screenplay, a script, a magazine article. That's a writer, but an author writes a book. So I'm very privileged and very grateful to the Crime Writers of Canada for the support since I've joined the organization as my first book, and of course for being shortlisted for this award.
When we first talked about 6 months ago, we did discuss the possibility, my humble opinion, that your book would translate very well to the screen, either a movie or a television show. You must know some some people in the industry, obviously. Has that progressed at all, or are you thinking more of your next book and let somebody else deal with that?
Well, both. As I'm a producer, I've always had multiple projects at various stages. I'm trying to, at this stage of my career, uh, have a sharper focus and fewer projects in development. I have attracted the support of a producer in Los Angeles, and we're working to, develop the book into a series that we hope will eventually, you can see on your favorite streaming service. I will confess that I began writing the book as a screenplay, and the more research that evolved, I thought, well, I want to attempt a book because screenplays screenplays based on true stories, and I've worked on quite a number of them, are about what you leave out. You can't put everything in, on screen. So a book, I thought I can put all of this incredible detail that fascinated me, I can incorporate this in the book. The book is now, if you like, the pitch document for the television series. And I think the step up is one thing to, and this is also for all of the writer friends whom I've met in crime writers who ask me these things because of my background in film and television. It puts your property in a different position. There are 10 million great ideas out there. Of those, maybe 10,000 will actually get written and be engaging. You go from readable to engaging to like, wow, this is great. But still the percentage of those that actually make it on screen is tiny. So having the book as IP, as intellectual property, gives it a recognition and makes it more desirable. And part of that is connecting the dots of some of these questions you've asked me. The more noise one can make with your book in the world, the more attention it draws. And I was very grateful that this is the Pacific Sun, which is published in Marin County, California, where I just had a book launch, and they put the book on the cover. So how great is that? You know, that was terrific.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a nice looking cover too. And if anybody's listening to this as a podcast, I found it on Facebook, and I can leave a link in there for you so you can see it too. Sorry, questions sometimes come up in my head and I can't help but ask it. A lot of times for us authors, if somebody in the film or television industry wanted to produce it or buy the rights, we sometimes as authors have to sort of hands off. We take the check and we say thank you. Would you be able to do that with this project, or would you want to be part of it?
Oh, no, no, I am a producer, and there's really no way this book could be put on the screen without my involvement in every aspect of it. That doesn't apply to everyone. And people have different agendas with their work. But I think part of what has both engaged readers, I'm very flattered. I would say more than 90% of the readers who talk to me say, well, and when can I watch it, on Netflix? So I'd love to have an answer for them. And, I hope I live that long.
I'm sure it's only a matter of time. That would be my guess. So we have to wait a little bit more time, you and I, to see the results of these awards. It's going to happen 9 days from today. I'm looking forward to the results. I can tell everybody I don't know who won, so I can wish you the best of luck, David.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's really always a pleasure to speak with you on these things. And as I said before, very grateful to Crime Writers of Canada for the support and for the nomination.